The sun had not yet risen, but the kingdom of Eldoria was already awake with fear. A pale mist covered the northern roads, drifting slowly like a curtain, hiding something dangerous behind it. Travelers avoided the path. Villagers stayed inside their homes, and even the birds remained silent, as if sensing an unseen threat. Far from the capital, an isolated watchtower built on a rocky hill. A lone guard stood tense, scanning the horizon. For weeks, strange reports had reached the king. Outposts attacked without warning, soldiers disappearing without leaving footprints, and whispers of a hidden force moving through the land. But on this morning, the silence broke that a distant rumble echoed through the valley, faint but unmistakable. The guard leaned forward, trying to see through the thinning mist. Something was moving. Not a group of riders, not a troop of soldiers, but shadows. Dozens of them. They glided across the valley floor with unnatural stillness. The guard's heart pounded as he stepped back. He had heard the rumors, but he never believed them until now. These figures carried no banners, made no sound, and showed no sign of origin. They advanced like nothing human. The guard rushed inside the tower, grabbed a scroll and ink, and with shaking hands wrote the message that would soon reach the king. They are coming. Silent. Unseen. Their numbers are growing. He sealed the message, tied it to the leg of a trained hawk, and released it into the gray morning sky. The bird soared upward, cutting through the mist, carrying the warning toward the capital. The guard returned to the tower window. But this time, the valley was empty. The shadows had vanished without leaving a single trace behind, and the silence returned deeper than before. The hawk's wings beat steadily through the cold morning air, while miles behind it, the guard remained frozen at the tower window, unsure if what he saw had been real. He stepped outside cautiously, scanning the rocky slopes. Nothing moved. No tracks. No broken branches. No trace that dozens of figures had crossed the valley moments ago. He felt a chill run through him, but it wasn't the wind. Something about their silence was unnatural, as if the shadows themselves had learned to walk. Meanwhile, the hawk flew fast toward the capital. Below, small villages began their morning routines. Fires lit, bread baked, animals fed, yet none of them knew that danger was creeping closer with every passing hour. Back at the watchtower, the guard forced himself to search the surroundings again. He climbed down the hill, boots crunching on loose gravel, and reached the valley floor. The ground should have shown footprints, drag marks, or even a sign of movement, but was untouched, smooth as if no one had passed. His unease grew. He knelt, brushing his fingers over the soil. It was cold, far colder than the air around him. A strange frost clung to the ground, forming thin lines that looked almost like symbols. He had never seen anything like it, that he stepped back, realizing the truth. This enemy did not move like normal men. They left behind nothing but a quiet warning. A warning carved into the land itself. The sudden gust of wind swept across the valley, carrying with it a faint echo, a whisper too soft to understand. The guard stood tall, forcing himself not to run. Whatever he had witnessed was only the beginning, and the king needed to know before the shadows returned. The hawk continued its steady flight toward the capital, but the guard remained in the valley longer than he intended. Something deep inside him urged him to leave. Yet another part of him felt that if he turned his back too soon, the shadows might reappear behind him. He finally forced himself up the slope toward the tower. Halfway up, he paused. A faint sound drifted through the air, soft, rhythmic, almost like footsteps. But when he looked around, the valley was empty. The sound faded as quickly as it had come to the top of the hill. He spotted movement near the tower door. A dark figure stood there, motionless. The guard froze, his breath caught in his throat. The figure didn't advance, didn't speak, didn't even seem to breathe. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then a cloud shifted, letting more light break across the hillside. The figure dissolved into the shadows cast by the tower wall. It hadn't walked away or disappeared behind something. It simply faded. The guard felt his heartbeat pounding in his ears. He struggled to steady his breathing. There was no doubt left. Whoever these silent enemies were, They did not follow the rules of ordinary men or ordinary armies. He pushed open the tower door and stepped inside. Everything was in place, the scrolls, the weapons, the lanterns. Yet the room felt colder than before, as if someone had stood there only moments earlier. He slowly picked up his spear and backed toward the center of the room. The silence pressed against his ears. Heavy and unnatural, he whispered to himself, "The king must prepare. This is no simple threat." Outside, the wind rose, sweeping across the valley again. But this time, the sound carried a distant echo, like the low hum of many voices moving together. The guard closed the tower door and bolted it, hoping it would hold until help arrived. Inside the watchtower, the guard tried to calm himself, but every instinct told him that staying still was dangerous. He lit a lantern, hoping the warm glow might push back the cold that had settled into the stones of the tower. Yet the flame flickered strangely, as if reacting to something unseen. That he climbed the narrow steps to the lookout platform, gripping the wooden railing as he emerged into the open air. From this height, he could see the entire valley, silent, untouched, and unsettlingly still. The mist had lifted, revealing a wide expanse of land where nothing moved, but the emptiness itself felt wrong. It was the kind of silence that came after something had happened, or just before something else was about to begin. He scanned the tree line. Nothing. His eyes moved toward the rocky ridge in the distance. Still nothing. Then his gaze stopped at the far edge of the valley. There, carved into the ground like a mark burned into the earth, was a long, curved symbol. He hadn't noticed it before. It stretched nearly 20 feet, glowing faintly with a pale blue outline. The shape was unfamiliar. Neither a letter nor a rune he knew to sign. A message, left intentionally. The guard's chest tightened. He realized the shadows had not come just to pass. They had come to leave something behind. A cold breeze swept across the platform, carrying with it a faint vibration, almost like a low chant. The guard strained to listen, but the sound broke apart in the wind. He stepped back from the railing, suddenly aware that he stood in full view. Something flashed in the corner of his eye. He spun around. A figure stood at the foot of the tower, tall, still, facing him directly. The same kind of figure he had seen before. Yet this one did not fade. It remained anchored to the ground, unmoving. Fear rushed through him, but he forced himself not to look away. Slowly, the figure raised an arm and pointed toward the symbol in the valley, a warning, a threat, or a message he was meant to deliver. The figure lowered its arm, took one step backward, and vanished into a ripple of air, as if the world had swallowed a whole. The guard gripped the railing tightly. Whatever this army was, whoever controlled them, wanted the kingdom to know something. And the king had only moments left before the hawk reached the capital with the first sign of danger. The storm was coming, and it was no longer silent. The guard stared at the fragment of frost, unable to move. It was small, no larger than his palm, but its shape was unmistakable. The same curved mark burned into the valley floor, now left at his doorstep like a quiet declaration that the shadows could reach him whenever they wished. He knelt slowly, examining it without touching. The frost glowed faintly, a pale blue shimmer pulsing like a heartbeat. It didn't melt, even though the morning air had warmed slightly. Instead, it seemed to deepen, the icy lines spreading outward across the stone floor by a fraction of an inch. He stepped back, realizing it was growing. The guard grabbed a metal plate from the table and slid it under the frost, lifting it carefully. The icy symbol remained intact, humming softly. Every instinct told him this object was dangerous, but it was also the only evidence the king would believe. He wrapped the plate in thick cloth and tied it tightly before placing it in a leather satchel. As he stood, a faint whisper drifted through the open doorway, so low he almost missed it. He stepped outside, scanning the hillside. The valley was quiet again, but not empty this time. A thin fog gathered near the rocky ridge, swirling in a slow spiral, as if responding to an unseen command. He felt the urge to retreat back inside, but he forced himself to stay. The shadows wanted him afraid. That much was clear. But fear would not stop the kingdom from falling. He had to deliver the message. He hurried back inside, grabbed his cloak, strapped the satchel to his belt, and slung his spear across his back. Before leaving, he paused at the window. The fog at the ridge shifted once more, forming a shape, tall, narrow, almost like a figure standing with its arms at its sides. But before he could focus his eyes, the fog unraveled and drifted away till he breathed out slowly. It's a warning or an invitation. Locking the tower behind him, he descended the rocky path at a cautious pace. His boots hit the earth softly, but every sound felt too loud in the suffocating quiet. Halfway down the hill, he noticed something new. The birds had returned to the branches, motionless, silent, staring in a single direction. All of them faced the north. None of them blinked. The guard swallowed hard. Whatever force moved through Eldoria had not only touched the land, it had silenced the very creatures that lived within it. He tightened his grip on the satchel. Now, more than ever, the king needed to know what was coming. The guard moved steadily down the slope, the bird's silent gaze following him until he reached the edge of the valley. He tried not to look back, but the eerie stillness pressed against his thoughts. Even the air felt different here, thicker, colder, as if it carried traces of the silent army's presence. That he crossed the valley floor quickly, avoiding the place where the glowing symbol had been carved. The mark was no longer visible, yet he could still feel it beneath the soil, as though it had sunk deeper into the earth rather than fading away. Yes, he reached the far side of the valley. He paused beside a cluster of tall pines. The trees stood unnaturally straight, branches rigid as if frozen mid-movement. He touched one trunk. It was ice cold, colder than any tree should be in this weather. He pulled his hand away and continued forward. The path narrowed as he approached a small stream that cut through the forest. Usually, the sound of running water filled the air here, but today the stream was silent. He crouched beside it, brushing the surface with his fingertips. The water was moving, but soundless. Not a single ripple made noise. Even the stones beneath the current were perfectly still. He stared at the stream in confusion. Something had drained sound itself from the landscape. A rustle echoed behind him. He turned sharply, spear ready, but found nothing except shifting pine needles. The forest seemed to watch him, every tree standing unnaturally tall and alert. He quickened his pace, following the path that would eventually lead him to the southern road. With each step, the silence thickened. No insects bast, no branches cracked. No wind passed through the leaves. Then, without warning, a single sound broke through the stillness. A footstep. Not his own. He spun around, spear raised. At the crest of a small hill stood a figure, tall, narrow, completely still. Its dark armor blended with the trees, and its mask reflected the faint morning light. It didn't move. It didn't threaten. It simply watched him. The guard felt his pulse quicken. He stepped backward slowly, careful not to provoke. The figure remained as silent as the rest of the world. Then, as he blinked, the figure vanished, not by stepping away, but by dissolving into the dim air, leaving behind a faint shimmer that drifted like ash. The guard steadied his breathing and whispered, "They're following me." He didn't run, but his steps grew faster, more deliberate. The kingdom needed his warning, and every moment the shadows tracked him meant the danger was spreading faster than anyone realized. He tightened the leather strap around the satchel, holding the frostmark plate. The message he carried was no longer just a warning. It was proof. The guard's pace quickened as he left the silent forest behind. The trees thinned, and patches of open land began to appear, offering him a clearer view of the world around him. Yet even in the open, the air remained unnaturally muted, as though sound itself had been stripped away till he reached a narrow ridge overlooking the lower plains. From here, he could see the road that would eventually lead toward the capital. Relief washed through him. Just a few hours of steady travel, and he would reach safety, soldiers, and the king's court. But the moment he stepped forward, he felt a sudden pressure rise in the air around him. The wind stopped. The silence deepened again, settling like a weight on his shoulders. He turned slowly. Across the ridge, 5 dark figures had appeared. Each one stood perfectly still, their armored silhouettes blending with the stone and shadows around them. They were spaced evenly apart, watching him without a single movement. The guard steadied his spear, forcing himself not to panic. He had seen a single shadow before, but five together was something else entirely. He called out, voice breaking the heavy quiet. I carry a message for the king. If you mean to stop me, do it now. The figures didn't respond. They didn't advance. Their presence alone felt like a warning, a reminder of how easily they could surround him if they wished. Then, one of the figures lifted an arm and pointed again. Not at the guard this time, but the distant plains behind him, the path toward the capital, that a message he did not understand. Before he could speak again, the ridge trembled lightly beneath his feet. Dust fell from the rocks. The figures lowered their arms. One by one, they stepped backward into thin air and vanished as if the world had simply erased them. The guard released a shaky breath. The silence eased just slightly, enough for the distant rustle of grass to return. The world was waking again after their departure. He descended the ridge quickly, his steps tense and controlled. Every shadow made him flinch. Every whisper of wind felt like a presence following him. Yet he pushed forward, clutching the satchel with the frostmark plate. As he reached the low plains, he glanced back at the ridge. Nothing stood there now, but the message was clear. The shadows weren't trying to kill him. They were warning him, or testing him, or guiding him towards something far more dangerous than he realized. Either way, the capital needed the truth, and he had very little time left. The plains stretched endlessly before the guard, dotted with clusters of trees and occasional rocky outcrops. Normally, he would have walked confidently along the main road, but today, every step felt cautious, every movement deliberate. He couldn't shake the sense that something or someone watched him from every shadow. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. He inhaled deeply, trying to calm his nerves. Yet the moment he exhaled, a faint glimmer caught his eye on the horizon. At first, he thought it was sunlight reflecting off a distant stream, but as he focused, he realized it was not water at all. It was movement, shapes shifting just beyond the line of sight. That he slowed his pace, peering carefully. The figures were too far to see clearly, but their formation was deliberate. They moved in silence, gliding across the land with perfect coordination, no signs of fatigue, no hesitation. The guard's hand tightened on the strap of his satchel. The frostmark plate felt heavier than ever, as if it carried not just a message, but a burden, a warning of what was coming. He ducked behind a large boulder and watched. The figures had stopped, forming a loose circle around something in the distance. From this distance, he could see that it was a small campfire, flames flickering despite the absence of smoke. Around the fire, he glimpsed more shapes, perhaps scouts or sentinels, but they were different from the others. Their movements were slower, more purposeful, as if carrying out instructions rather than merely testing the land. The guard realized then that the shadows had a hierarchy. Not all were the same. Some were scouts, some were soldiers, some were leaders. That he pressed himself against the boulder, heart hammering. If the shadows could move this way without sound, without detection, what chance did the kingdom's soldiers have if they arrived unprepared? He made a decision. He could not linger. The capital needed to know before these forces moved closer. He adjusted the satchel, took a deep breath, and started moving again, keeping to the cover of rocks and low hills, avoiding the direct line of sight of the mysterious army. Every step forward brought him closer to safety, and closer to the realization that Eldoria faced a threat unlike anything it had ever known. The guard continued across the plains, moving cautiously but steadily. Each step was measured, every shadow scrutinized, yet the distant figures did not pursue him. It was as if they were letting him pass, observing from afar, testing his resolve rather than attacking. Hours passed, and the landscape slowly changed. Trees became sparser, replaced by rolling hills that led toward the southern road. The wind carried familiar scents, smoke from distant villages, the tang of the river, and the faint warmth of cultivated fields. For a moment, he allowed himself to think that danger was behind him. But the momentary relief vanished when he noticed a pattern in the fields. The crops had been trampled in straight, deliberate lines, as though someone had walked across them with perfect precision. There were no footprints, no signs of struggle, only the unmistakable evidence of the silent army's passing. He tightened his grip on the satchel, realizing their reach extended far beyond the forest and valley. They could move freely across open land without leaving a trace, appearing wherever they wished, vanishing without warning. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the plains. The guard pressed on, moving faster now. He knew the capital lay several hours ahead, but the distance felt longer than ever, and the weight of the frostmark plate grew heavier with each step. Then, in the fading light, he saw smoke rising in the distance, not from the villages, but from the road itself. Thin, black curls that spiraled upward, unnatural in their stillness. His pulse quickened. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant danger. He approached cautiously, keeping low among the rocks and sparse trees. As he drew closer, he saw the remnants of a small camp. Discarded tools, scattered supplies, and no one in sight. Not a single soul remained, but the silence was complete. Not even the birds had returned. He knelt beside the remnants, examining the ground. No footprints, no dog marks, only faint impressions that seemed to fade as he looked at them directly. The guard exhaled slowly, a cold realization settling in. The army was moving with precision and secrecy beyond comprehension. Their path was unpredictable, their presence unstoppable. He readjusted the satchel, lifting it higher on his back. The king must be warned immediately. Whatever this force was, it was already within Eldoria's borders. The storm had begun, and there was no turning back. The guard pressed onward, the last light of day fading behind the hills. Shadows stretched long across the road, but he did not slow. Every instinct urged caution, yet he knew he could not stop. The capital awaited, and with it, the answers that could save or doom. The kingdom, as night fell, he entered a narrow canyon. The walls rose sharply on either side, blocking out the wind and swallowing sound. Even his own footsteps seemed muffled, swallowed by the oppressive darkness. He gripped the satchel tightly, feeling the faint vibration of the frost-marked plate against his back, a reminder that the danger he carried was more than a warning. It was a key that a sudden movement caught his eye. A shadow darted along the canyon wall, disappearing before he could focus. The guard froze, listening. Nothing. The canyon remained silent, but the feeling of being watched pressed in from every side. He moved again, slower this time, every step deliberate. Ahead, the narrow pass opened onto a moonlit plateau. He could see the road winding toward the capital, lit by the faint glow of distant torches. Relief surged in him, but it was short-lived. A whisper of wind carried a sound he would never forget, a soft, synchronized rhythm, like countless footsteps moving in perfect unison, but with no source he could see. The hair on his neck stood on end. The shadows were near. They had anticipated his path. He pressed himself against the canyon wall, heart hammering. From the darkness, shapes began to emerge, slender, masked figures gliding silently across the plateau. They spread out methodically, surrounding the path ahead. Their movement was eerily coordinated, and yet they made no sound. The guard's mind raced. If he continued along the open road, he would be trapped. But turning back meant retracing steps into the silent army he had already encountered. There was only one choice: to move forward and hope that speed and caution were enough. He took a deep breath, steadied his grip on the satchel, and stepped onto the open plateau. The shadows shifted, moving slightly to block his path. The guard's pulse thundered in his ears. Every instinct screamed to flee. Yet he kept walking, each step deliberate, his eyes scanning every movement. The frost-marked plate throbbed faintly against his back. Whatever force controlled these figures, it knew he carried proof. And it wanted him to reach the capital, alive, but tested. The guard tightened his cloak around him, bracing for what he knew was coming next. The silent army was no longer just a rumor. It was real, and it was waiting for him. The guard's footsteps echoed faintly across the plateau, though the shadows made no sound. The masked figures flanked the path, their stillness unnerving, their presence a constant reminder of the unseen force that had been tracking him all day. Each movement he made was measured, cautious, yet deliberate. He knew the slightest misstep could provoke them as he neared the crest of a small rise. The first flickers of the capital's walls appeared in the moonlight. Relief surged in him, but it was tempered by the knowledge that he still carried the kingdom's warning in the frostmarked plate. He had reached the edge of safety, yet the shadows had followed every step of the way that a sudden gust of wind swept across the plateau, lifting dust and small stones. The figures shifted slightly, then vanished, dissolving into the night air as if they had never been there. The silence returned, heavier than before, pressing against the guard's chest. For a moment, he feared they might return behind him. As he continued, he took a deep breath and began the final stretch toward the capital. Each step was quick and controlled, the satchel secured tightly against his body. As he descended toward the road that would lead him through the outskirts and into the city gates, he kept glancing behind him, half expecting the shadows to reappear. But the path remained clear. Finally, the stone walls of Eldoria loomed ahead. Torches glimmered along the ramparts, and the distant sound of guards shifting at their posts reminded him that life still moved within the city. He slowed his pace, approaching the gates carefully, knowing that the warning he carried was more urgent than anything the king had yet heard. The guard's journey across the valley, the forest, and the plains had brought him here, but the true danger had only begun. The silent army had been revealed in fragments, leaving messages, frost, and fear. Now, the kingdom would learn the full extent of the threat, and the king would need to act swiftly. He stepped forward to the gate, heart pounding, knowing that the storm gathering over Eldoria was no longer distant. It was here, and the future of the kingdom rested in the hands of those brave enough to face it.